Oh yeah, here we go, ports time! Sorry, I couldn't resist. It's a harsh reality for us video game aficionados that the more time passes after a game's release, the more difficult it becomes to get hold of the necessary hardware to play it. If you don't hoard retro consoles like some sort of weird dragon, it's likely that some of your favourite titles will become a mere memory. Fortunately, the people behind our most treasured games will often recognise that the times they are a-changing and make sure that certain titles are ported to additional platforms so that players can continue to enjoy them for years to come. For this list, we're looking at the games that have been ported to different platforms more often than most, bringing the joy of playing them to multitudes of systems across several generations. For some of these games, the information on exactly how many different platforms they've been ported to is a little woolly, so please forgive us for not quoting exact numbers. With all that out of the way, I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are 10 of the most ported video games. Number 10. Resident Evil 4. We're kicking off this list with a game where the main goal is to kick a bunch of European villagers in their parasite-loving faces. Fine, that's not the entire point of the game, but you have to admit it's a hell of a lot of fun roundhousing farmers. Originally released for the GameCube in 2005, Resident Evil 4 is considered to be the best entry in its franchise, so there's little wonder that it didn't stay exclusive to the platform for very long. By October 2005, just 9 months after Resident Evil 4's initial release, the game had already been ported to the PlayStation 2. Not only did Sony fans get to enjoy all of Leon S. Kennedy's exploits, but they were also treated to the new scenario, separate ways in which Ada Wong attempts to retrieve a sample of the Plaga. From there, Resi 4 got a release on the Wii, as well as a mobile edition, and in 2011 Capcom gave the whole thing a nice shiny remaster and launched it on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. It then also came to Xbox One and PS4, because of course it did. The most recent port of the game dropped in May 2019 when it landed on the Nintendo Switch, though with a remake in the works, the Switch edition could very well be the last port we see. Number 9. Rayman 2: The Great Escape. Considering just how much fun Rayman 2: The Great Escape is, we really can't blame Ubisoft for wanting to port it to as many platforms as possible. The plot of the game follows the titular Rayman as he attempts to save Fairy Glade from an army of evil robot pirates led by the dastardly Admiral Razorbeard. Originally released in 1999 for the N64, Rayman 2 has received a number of ports to various different systems over the years. Less than 12 months after it originally dropped, the game ported to PC, and along with it came a number of improvements to the game's graphics, sounds, textures, and music. More graphical updates were made for the Dreamcast version, and by the time Rayman 2 made it to the PlayStation, the gibberish dialogue spoken by the characters had been replaced by actual, proper languages.
Press square button longer to make your shot stronger.
As time went on, the game would go on to port to iOS, as well as to the PlayStation Network in 2012, allowing gamers from more recent generations to enjoy the title. It's also had remakes for both the PlayStation 2 and Game Boy Color, but since those aren't ports, they don't count on this list. Get out of here, remakes. This is Port Town, which is an important distinction. Number 8. Final Fantasy. It's a little-known fact that all the way back in the 80s, when Final Fantasy was just a fledgling idea in Hironobu Sakaguchi's mind, Square Enix, or Square as they were known at the time, weren't all that keen on developing an RPG. It was only when Dragon Quest proved to be a massive hit that Sakaguchi was allowed to move forward with his project, and thus Final Fantasy was born. In the end, it turned out to be a good decision on Square's part, as Final Fantasy proved hugely popular. Not only did it spawn an entire franchise that has a huge number of sequels and spin-offs, but the original title has been ported more times than we can count. Originally released in Japan in 1987 for the Famicom, Final Fantasy received a single port in the 90s, but it wasn't until the 2000s that the ports really started coming thick and fast. Throughout the first decade of the new millennium, Final Fantasy was ported numerous times, making its way onto the PlayStation and the Wii amongst others, and once the 2010s rolled around, it also made the leap to iOS, Wii U, and many more. As recently as 2021, a remaster has been made available on Steam, so it's unlikely that we've seen the last port of this beloved retro classic. Number 7. Doom. Though it's courted its fair share of controversy over the years, that hasn't stopped the 1993 first-person shooter Doom from making its way onto more platforms than you could possibly shake a BFG at. Originally released for MS-DOS, it wasn't long before Doom was being ported left, right, and centre. After all, it wasn't really very fair that the PC Master Race got to have all the fun, now was it? In November 1994, just 11 months after the original was released, versions of the game for the Sega 32X and the Atari Jaguar were launched, though they did lack some of the content of their PC counterpart. By the turn of the century, Doom had also been ported to the PlayStation, the SNES, the 3DO, and the Sega Saturn, and once the new millennium had rolled around, the game was also unleashed on a variety of different platforms, including the Xbox, Xbox 360, and even the Game Boy Advance. The OG 1993 title was so beloved, in fact, that both Doom and Doom 2 are available to play on Doomslayer's PC in 2020's Doom Eternal. For those trying to keep track, that's a port playable in a sequel to a remake of the port. Number 6. Prince of Persia. For whatever reason, people just seem to love tales of swashbuckling heroes saving damsels or manzels in distress from vile antagonists, so there's no wonder that Prince of Persia has remained popular amongst gamers. After the evil Jafar, no, not that one, locks away the Sultan's daughter and orders her to marry him, it's up to the unnamed protagonist to swing into action and rescue his lady love. The game, first launched on the Apple II, was a massive hit, and it was less than a year after its North American release that Prince of Persia got its first port onto the PC 9800, a computer system popular in Japan. Throughout the early 90s, it continued to be ported on a semi-regular basis, and between October 1990 and February 1994, it made its way onto no less than 15 different systems, including the Game Boy, the SNES, and the Sega Genesis. Things did slow down a little for Prince of Persia after this. However, after the turn of the century, it was still ported to a number of platforms, including the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Nintendo Wii. Sadly, Prince of Persia hasn't had a port since 2012, so it remains to be seen if this classic will make its way onto modern consoles, or if it's been lost to the sands of time again. Sorry, couldn't help myself. Number 5. The Elder Scrolls V: Skyrim. It was the legend himself, Todd Howard, that said, "If you want us to stop releasing Skyrim ports, stop buying them," and we can't help but admire his honesty. After all, I think we can truthfully say that if Bethesda brought out a version of the game that you could play on a graphics calculator, we'd probably shell out for it. The Elder Scrolls V: Skyrim was initially released in 2011 for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Microsoft Windows, and just 5 years later a remastered version of the game was released, allowing PlayStation 4, PC, and Xbox One users to get a piece of the dragon-slaying action with an updated game engine and graphical enhancements. Since then, Skyrim has released in VR, with versions for both PlayStation and Windows being made available in recent years, and has an edition for the Nintendo Switch. At E3 2018, Bethesda parodied itself by releasing a trailer for the Skyrim Very Special Edition, which alleged that ports of the game would be coming to Amazon's Alexa, Etch-a-Sketch, Motorola Pages, and Samsung smart fridges. The joke was on us though, because it turns out that they really were developing a version of Skyrim for Alexa. Well played, Todd Howard. Well played. Number 4. Sonic the Hedgehog. Though it's been over 30 years since the little blue hedgehog called Sonic made his way onto our consoles, he's still a much-loved member of the gaming community, so much so, in fact, that every few years we're treated to a shiny new port of his OG title. Released in 1991, the original Sonic the Hedgehog spawned an icon of video gaming, quickly becoming one of the best-selling games of all time and giving birth to a franchise that, granted, has had its ups and downs but is undeniably an important part of the industry's history. Though it initially landed on the Sega Genesis, the game didn't remain a console exclusive for too long. In 1997 and 1998, the publisher released a collection of Sonic titles, including a port of the first game for the Sega Saturn and the Game.com. Despite it only having been a few years since the originals were released, the compilation was well received, and over the years Sonic the Hedgehog ports have cropped up in various game collections on everything from the PlayStation 2 to the Nintendo DS. If you've so far missed out on the game, fret not, because at the time of writing there's a new port in the works for the current generation. Number 3. Dragon's Lair. By today's standards, the 1983 game Dragon's Lair seems a little quaint. Don't get us wrong, it's an important piece of gaming history and is probably part of the reason that titles like Until Dawn and the Dark Pictures anthology are so popular, but when it comes to gameplay, it is a little lacking on the interactivity front. Originally released in arcades, it wasn't long before audiences were crying out for Dirk the Daring's exploits to be made available to them in their own homes. Owing to the huge amount of money it required, however, and how little consoles had to offer back in the 80s, what they ended up with was a trimmed-down version of the game. Fortunately, in the early 2000s, editions were released that included the full arcade version of the game, plus a few extra animated scenes thrown in as a cheeky bonus. Since then, Dragon's Lair has graced every console generation, and there have even been versions released for mobile and home Blu-ray players. In 2002, developer Dragonstone did attempt a remake of Dragon's Lair, but it didn't really captivate the audience in the same way as the original, and since then, we've continually been in receipt of ports on a fairly regular basis. Number 2. Street Fighter II. Long before Mortal Kombat came along and started tearing out people's spines and upsetting parents all over the world, there was Street Fighter, a series of arcade games that allowed players to slap the digital crap out of each other for the low price of just a few pennies. With fighting games evolving as they have over the years, you might think that people would go off Street Fighter II, but it turns out you'd be wrong, as Capcom have continued to churn out ports for more and more consoles, with no hint from the audience that they're getting sick of them. Following its first round of successful ports to the likes of the SNES and the Commodore 64, Street Fighter II made its way onto the Game Boy, the Master System, and the PlayStation, all before the 1990s were over. Since the turn of the millennium came, there were still no signs that players were bored of the title, and versions for mobile and the PS2 and Xbox were released between 2004 and 2006. As recently as 2018, Capcom has dropped ports of Street Fighter II, allowing last-gen players to get in on the fun. Considering how lucrative the game continues to be, we wouldn't be surprised at a PS5 and Xbox Series X port landing in the near future. Number 1. Tetris. What else could have taken the number 1 spot besides a little title that literally holds the Guinness World Record for being the most ported game? At the point that it received the accolade in 2010, Tetris had already been ported a staggering 65 times, and considering that was well over 10 years ago, that number is surely much higher by now. Originally released in 1984 for the Electronica 60 computer system, Tetris has been made available on a wide variety of systems. The ports began in the late 80s when the game made a jump onto a plethora of different platforms, including the Commodore 64, MS-DOS, and the Famicom. In 1989, the Game Boy and NES got in on the Tetris action, and since then there's barely been a year that's passed without the game making its debut on a new system. From arcade cabinets to iOS and Android, there's almost no device that can't run Tetris in one way or another. Hell, you could even get it on your iPod if you'd been so inclined. Though with each iteration small tweaks have been made to the game, the core mechanics of Tetris have remained the same ever since its debut nearly 4 decades earlier, and on the basis that it's remained a beloved classic title, we don't expect the ports to stop anytime soon.